I waited until the digital clock on my monitor clicked over to precisely 2 a.m. before I finally attached the file. The silence in my university office wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a presence, a heavy, weighted blanket of quiet that felt ancient and absolute. My office, usually a sanctuary of leather-bound books and the faint, sweet smell of aging paper, felt like a command center, a war room where the only weapon was a single PDF document. The document was Dr. Kane's submission for the university's most prestigious honor, the Chandler Award, a work he called his magnum opus, a work I knew to be a comprehensive and audacious theft. My finger hovered over the mouse, the little white arrow trembling almost imperceptibly over the word send. This is the part that people never understand. They see the result, the explosion, the public downfall, and they call it revenge. They imagine a fit of pique, a dramatic confrontation, a righteous explosion of fury. But it's never like that. True, tectonic shifts in power don't happen with a bang. They happen in the crushing silence of a 2 a.m. office, with a single deliberate click. My email was addressed to Dr. Esme Reed, a name that probably meant nothing to anyone else on the tenure committee, a ghost from a different academic world. But to me, and more importantly, to the young man whose career I was about to detonate, she was everything. She was the source, the ghost in his machine, the chair of the Chandler Award Committee, and the very scholar whose obscure, untranslated work on 15th-century Iberian linguistic drift formed the entire, glittering, fraudulent core of Kane's research. The body of my email was short, terse. All it said was, Esme. A quick personal note. Here is the submission from a protégé of mine, Dr. Kane. I believe you'll find his analysis particularly familiar. All the best, Amelia. Then, I clicked. The email vanished from my outbox with a soft, digital whoosh. There was no fanfare, no thunderclap, just the quiet hum of my computer and the low, rhythmic beat of my own heart. It was done. The trap I had spent 6 months meticulously building, baiting, and setting was now sprung, and Dr. Kane, my brilliant, ruthless, charming protégé, was walking right into it, whistling a happy tune. If you've ever poured your soul into your work only to watch someone else take the credit, if you've ever felt that cold, sickening twist in your gut when you realize you've been played, then you know why I did it, and I need you to stick with me, to hear this whole story, because it's important to know that you're not just screaming into the void. Your stories, your validation, they matter. So let me know in the comments if you've been there. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Dr. Amelia Finch. I'm a senior professor of historical linguistics, and for the past 2 years, I have been the biggest champion, the staunchest defender, and the most dedicated mentor to Dr. Alistair Kane. I saw him through his contentious hiring process, I guided his research, and I used my own political capital, built over 30 years of quiet, diligent work, to shield him from the department's more cynical old guard. I told everyone who would listen that he was a generational talent, a wunderkind, the future of our field. I was the one who put his name forward for early tenure. I was the one who insisted he apply for the Chandler Award. In a way, I suppose you could say I built his throne. And what he never knew, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, is that I also built the gallows right beside it. And it wasn't about revenge. It was never about revenge. It was about balance. The moment of discovery wasn't a lightning strike. It was more like a slow, creeping dampness in the stone walls of a cellar. It was a feeling before it was a fact. I was reviewing a draft of the paper Kane was preparing for the Journal of Pre-Modern Philology, a paper that would become the cornerstone of his Chandler submission. I was reading a passage about phonetic decay in isolated Pyrenean communities, and a particular phrase stopped me cold. He described the linguistic shift not as a corruption of the original tongue, but as a calcification of an echo. Calcification of an echo. It was beautiful, it was evocative, and it was not his. My heart didn't drop. It seized. It was a physical, painful clench in my chest. I knew that phrase. I hadn't read it in 20 years, but I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. I closed my eyes, and I was no longer in my brightly lit office. I was in a dusty, poorly heated library in Coimbra, Portugal, a graduate student running on cheap coffee and boundless, naive passion. and across the table from me was Esme Reed, my friend. My brilliant, ferocious, and perpetually underfunded friend. We were arguing, as we always were, about the very texts Cain was supposedly discovering. And Esme, frustrated with my more conventional interpretation, had slammed her hand on the table and said, "It's not decay, Amelia. It's the calcification of an echo. The original sound is still there, just trapped in stone." My eyes snapped open. The air in my office felt thin, frigid. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I went to the tall, dark wood bookshelf that housed my oldest research archives. My hands were shaking, not with rage, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. I pulled down a heavy, unlabeled binder filled with my own handwritten notes from that research trip 2 decades ago. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded to a faint blue. I flipped through the pages, my breath catching in my throat. And there it was, in my own handwriting, a direct quote from a conversation. E. Reed, calcification of an echo. It could be a coincidence. Parallel thought. The human mind is a strange and recursive thing. That's what I told myself. It was a desperate plea to the universe. Please, let this be a coincidence. Let me not be this foolish. But I knew it wasn't. I spent the next 3 hours in a frantic digital archaeological dig. Esme had never published her dissertation in English. After getting her doctorate, she had taken a position at a small, respectable university in Lisbon. Her work, published in Portuguese academic journals with tiny circulation numbers, was brilliant but functionally invisible to the Anglophone academic world. It was the perfect crime. He was stealing from a ghost. I finally found it. On a forgotten corner of the internet, a digital archive of the University of Lisbon's Humanities Journal from the late 90s. I downloaded the PDF of her Keystone article. I didn't even need the translation software I had open in another window. I just needed to look at the charts, the data sets, the painstakingly mapped phonetic trees. They were identical to Cain's. Not similar. Not inspired by. Identical. He had lifted her life's work, her soul's labor, and passed it off as his own. He had taken her beautiful, obscure garden and paved it over to build a parking lot with his name on it. I leaned back in my chair, the 2 documents glowing on my dual monitors. On the left, Esme's quiet, humble, groundbreaking truth. On the right, Cain's loud, ambitious, glittering lie. And I, Dr. Amelia Finch, his mentor, his champion, was standing right in the middle. I had helped him. I had used my credibility to legitimize his fraud. The dampness in the cellar had become a flood, and I was drowning in it. The silence of my office was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. The first few days after the discovery were a private walking hell. I'd see him in the hallway, and he would greet me with that brilliant, easy smile. "Amelia," he'd say, "just the person I wanted to see. I had a breakthrough last night on the Basque cognates. I think I've cracked it." And I would have to smile back, my face feeling like a porcelain mask ready to shatter. "That's wonderful, Alistair," I'd say, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. "Tell me about it." I had to listen to him excitedly explain my friend's 20-year-old theories back to me as if they were his own divine inspiration. Each word was a fresh shovel of dirt on the grave of my own integrity. The physical sensation was one of perpetual nausea. The coffee in my mug tasted like ash. The very air in my own office, my sanctuary, felt contaminated. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd sit in the dark of my living room, the city lights painting cold, indifferent patterns on the wall, and I would just unravel. The betrayal wasn't just his, it felt like my own. I had built a career on one simple principle: intellectual honesty. It was the bedrock of everything I believed our profession stood for. We were custodians of knowledge, not real estate developers. We were meant to build upon the foundations laid by others, yes, but we were supposed to honor the architects. Cain hadn't just stolen bricks, he dynamited the original building and claimed to have invented architecture itself, and I was his chief investor. My mind kept replaying our first meeting. He had arrived at my office door a whirlwind of nervous energy and raw, unpolished ambition. He was fresh out of his PhD program at a top-tier university, a place that valued aggressive self-promotion over quiet scholarship. He told me he'd read my seminal work on Proto-Romance dialects and that it was the reason he'd applied to our university. He quoted my own words back to me, not in a fawning way, but in a way that showed he'd wrestled with them. He was charming, he was hungry, and he reminded me of myself, back when I believed the world of academia was a pure meritocracy. I saw a younger me in his eyes, a version of myself that hadn't yet been dulled by decades of committee meetings and budget cuts. So I took him under my wing. It felt like a duty. It felt like planting a tree that I knew would one day grow to cast a great shadow. I remembered the early days of his mentorship. He was a quick study, not just of the material, but of the political landscape of the department. He knew exactly who to flatter, which meetings to attend, and whose research to praise. I saw it as strategic intelligence. I helped him frame his first few papers, small but solid pieces that were, I now realized in hindsight, entirely his own. They were good, but not brilliant. They were competent, but not revolutionary. The shift had happened slowly, insidiously. About a year into his post, he stumbled upon a new line of inquiry, this obscure corner of Iberian linguistics. He claimed he'd found a trove of unexamined documents. He brought me what he said were his initial findings. I was stunned. The conceptual leap was enormous. It was the kind of work that makes a career overnight. I was so proud. I was so thrilled for him, and for myself. My judgment, my eye for talent, had been validated in the most spectacular way. My pride had made me blind. It had made me stupid. Now, sitting in the dark, I sifted through those memories, looking for the red flags I had so willfully ignored. There was the time he'd presented a section of that new research to a small faculty colloquium. Professor Albright, a notoriously prickly but thorough old scholar, had asked him a pointed question about his methodology. A simple, technical question. And Kane had faltered. Just for a second. He'd deflected with a charming joke, turned the question back on the audience, and promised to include a more detailed methodological appendix in the final paper. I had seen it, noted it, and then dismissed it as a simple case of nerves. He was a young academic, after all. Who wouldn't be nervous in front of Albright? I had even defended him to a colleague later, saying, "The boy's a genius, not an accountant. His mind moves too fast for the tedious details." What a fool I had been. The worst part was the memory of Esme. The subplot to this entire tragedy was our friendship. We had been inseparable in graduate school, two young women from working-class backgrounds, trying to make our way in the rarefied, male-dominated world of historical linguistics. We bonded over our shared sense of being outsiders. We fueled each other's passion. We were a two-person army against the world. Our dreams were identical, a tenure-track position, a few well-regarded books, a life of the mind. But our paths diverged sharply. I was a pragmatist. I chose a field of study that, while niche, had enough mainstream appeal to be fundable. I learned to play the political game, to write the grants, to sit on the committees. Esme was a purist. She refused to compromise. She followed her intellectual curiosity into the most obscure, untranslatable, and unfundable corners of our discipline. She was the more brilliant mind, and we both knew it. But brilliance alone doesn't pay the bills. I got the tenure-track job at a prestigious American university. She got a lecturer position in Lisbon, where she was respected but isolated from the main currents of the academic world. We had lost touch over the years, the occasional holiday email being the only thin thread connecting us. But I never forgot the promise we made to each other one drunken night, celebrating the submission of our dissertations. We were sitting on the floor of her tiny apartment, surrounded by stacks of books, and she had looked at me with a fierce intensity. "Amelia," she'd said, "no matter what happens, no matter where we end up, we protect the work, we protect the truth. We don't let the bastards grind it down." I had raised my glass and clinked it against hers. "To the work," I'd said. And now, Alistair Kane was grinding her work, her truth, into dust to pave his own path to glory. And I, her old friend, had been holding the goddamn steamroller. This guilt was the first stage. It was a suffocating, passive thing. It was the desire to crawl into bed and never get out. But that phase ended. It was replaced by something else, something colder and harder. The catalyst wasn't a single lightning bolt of inspiration. It was the slow, steady drip of observation. It was Maria. Maria was my other protégé, my real protégé. A doctoral student in her 4th year. She was the antithesis of Cain. She was quiet, painstaking, and consumed by a near-crippling case of imposter syndrome. Her work was slow, but it was meticulously honest. Every source was triple-checked, every conclusion agonized over for weeks. She was brilliant in a way that didn't sparkle, but burned with a low, steady heat. The day after my horrible discovery, Maria had her weekly meeting with me. She sat across from my desk, her shoulders slumped, her eyes downcast. She pushed a single sheet of paper towards me. It was a paragraph, one single perfect jewel-like paragraph that had probably taken her a month to write. She said, "I don't know if it's any good, Dr. Finch. I feel like I'm just moving commas around. I feel like everyone else is lapping me. People like Dr. Kane. He's so brilliant. Everything seems to come to him so easily." I looked at her genuine, painful struggle. I saw the deep, furrowed lines of concentration on her face, the ink stains on her fingers. I saw the agonizing, beautiful, and noble process of creating something real, something true. And then I thought of Cain, with his easy smile and his stolen breakthroughs. I thought of him effortlessly lapping this wonderful, honest scholar. And in that moment, the guilt in my gut curdled into a cold, hard knot of rage. Not a hot, shouting rage, a glacial rage, the kind that doesn't burn but freezes. That afternoon, as if on cue from some cosmic, ironic force, I received an email from Cain. "Amelia," it began, with his usual breezy confidence. "Hope you're having a great week. Quick question. The deadline for the Chandler Award nominations is next Friday. I was hesitant to presume, but a few people have suggested I'd be a strong candidate. What do you think? I'd obviously be honored beyond words if you'd be willing to write the nominating letter." I stared at the email on my screen, the sheer, unmitigated audacity of it. He wanted me to nominate his stolen work for the university's highest honor. He wanted me to take the final, ultimate step in consecrating his fraud. He wasn't just content to steal the research. He wanted to mount it on a pedestal in the center of the university quad and receive a medal for it. And that was it. That was the moment my resolve crystallized. My despair, my guilt, my rage, they all coalesced into a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. A simple accusation wouldn't work. He was too charming, too well-liked. He'd claim I was a jealous, bitter old woman trying to sabotage her brilliant young rival. He would create doubt. He would muddy the waters. A whisper campaign, a formal complaint. It would all dissolve into a messy he said, she said political battle that he was far better equipped to win than I was. No, I couldn't just expose him. That would be messy, and the outcome uncertain. I had to create a situation where he would expose himself, in a way that was undeniable, irrevocable, and public. I had to give him enough rope, not just to hang himself, but to braid the noose, test its strength, and kick the chair out from under himself. The Chandler Award wasn't a risk. It was the perfect stage. It was the ultimate trap, and I was going to be the one to smilingly usher him onto it. I leaned forward and began to type my reply. "Alistair," I wrote, my fingers steady, my heart like a stone. "What a wonderful idea. I think you would be a magnificent candidate. In fact, I can think of no one more deserving. I would be absolutely honored to nominate you." The plan, once it formed, had a terrifying crystalline logic to it. It was no longer an emotional reaction. It was an academic problem to be solved, a strategy to be executed. My first step was to confirm the composition of the Chandler Award Committee. This had to be done with the utmost subtlety. I couldn't just call the provost's office and ask. That would leave a trail. Instead, I used the university's arcane bureaucratic machinery to my advantage. I sent an email to a friend in the administration, a woman named Carol, with whom I had served on a tedious curriculum committee for years. My email was about a completely unrelated matter, a question about funding for graduate student travel. At the very end, as a seeming afterthought, I added a postscript. P.S. On a completely different note, I heard a rumor that the university managed to get someone truly top tier to chair the Chandler Committee this year. Any truth to that? Just curious to see who they wrangled. Carol, a notorious but reliable gossip, replied within the hour. Her email answered my funding question, and then, as I knew it would, dove into the juicy part. "You heard right," she wrote. "They got some big-shot international scholar from Portugal. Apparently, she's the world's leading expert on some obscure medieval dialect. Name's Esme Reed. A major coup for the provost. He's been crowing about it for weeks." I read the name Esme Reed, and a cold, grim satisfaction settled over me. It was perfect. It was more than perfect. It was poetic. The universe wasn't just offering me a weapon. It was offering me a perfectly calibrated instrument of justice. The very person he had stolen from would now be his judge. My next step was to re-establish contact with Esme herself. This was even more delicate. It had been years since we'd had a real conversation. A sudden, effusive email out of the blue would be suspicious, especially if it came right before she received Kane's nomination. I had to lay a benign groundwork. I found a recent article she had published and sent her a short professional note. "Dear Esme," I wrote, "I was just reading your latest piece on phonetic fossilization. A fascinating argument. It brought me right back to our late-night debates in Coimbra. I hope you are well. It's been too long. All the best, Amelia." It was a simple, friendly gesture. An academic reaching out to a respected colleague. She replied a few days later, a warm and friendly email that expressed surprise and delight to hear from me. We exchanged a few more messages over the following weeks, catching up on our lives, our careers, our families. We rebuilt the fragile bridge of our old friendship, email by email. I never once mentioned the Chandler Award. I never once mentioned Alistair Kane. I was simply reconnecting with an old friend. I was planting a seed in neutral soil. With the trap set, my role now shifted to that of the enthusiastic co-conspirator. I became Kane's most indispensable ally in his quest for the Chandler. I met with him weekly to go over his submission packet. This was the most difficult part. I had to sit there smiling serenely while he presented Esme's stolen work as his own. I had to read her elegant prose, her brilliant insights coming from his mouth, and I had to nod and say, "Excellent, Alistair. That's a truly revolutionary way of looking at it." My own duplicity was nauseating, but I knew it was necessary. My goal was not just to let him submit the plagiarized work. It was to encourage him to make it the centerpiece of his entire application. I had to ensure the most damning evidence was front and center. During one of our meetings, he expressed a moment of doubt. "Amelia," he said, frowning at a page of his draft, "maybe this section is too dense, too academic. It's the core of my argument, but maybe I should lead with something more accessible." My heart hammered in my chest. This was a critical moment. He was thinking of burying the evidence. I leaned forward, affecting an air of deep, scholarly sincerity. "Alistair, no," I said, my voice firm. "Do not doubt yourself. This is the heart of your contribution. This is the work that will make the committee sit up and take notice. It's dense. Yes, but it's brilliant. This isn't an undergraduate teaching award. It's the Chandler. They want to see the groundbreaking theory. This section is your crown jewel. You must lead with it." He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. He was looking for validation, for the confirmation of his own genius. And I gave it to him, unconditionally. I saw the relief wash over his features. He smiled that brilliant smile. "You're right," he said. "Of course you're right. I was just having a moment of insecurity." I smiled back. "We all have them," I said. "That's what mentors are for, to remind us of our own strength." I felt like a monster. It was a quiet, cold, and calculated act of psychological manipulation, and it worked perfectly. He not only kept the plagiarized sections, he expanded them. He made them the entire foundation of his claim to genius. He was building his own pyre, and I was handing him the driest timber. While this dark opera played out, I made a point of investing more time in Maria. She became my moral compass, the living embodiment of what I was fighting for. Her slow, honest struggle was the antidote to the poison of Kane's easy fraud. I secured a small departmental grant to fund her research trip to a remote archive in the north of Spain, an archive I knew held corollary documents to Esme's original research. I didn't tell her what to look for. I just told her, "Follow your curiosity, Maria. Trust your instincts. The documents will speak to you if you listen carefully enough." It wasn't just about destroying Cain. That felt too small, too personal. It was about clearing the ground. It was about pruning the strangling weeds so that a genuine rare flower like Maria could have enough sunlight to bloom. I was creating a vacuum that a true scholar could fill. My actions weren't just destructive. They were, in their own terrible way, creative. I was burning down a corrupt structure, but I was also laying the foundation for a new one, a better one. This is what I told myself, over and over, in the long, silent nights. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring the ecosystem. The weeks leading up to the submission deadline were a masterclass in deception. I wrote Cain's nominating letter myself. It was, if I do say so myself, a masterpiece of glowing praise. I called his work a paradigm shift, a once-in-a-generation intellectual leap, and the most significant contribution to the field in the last 50 years. I used every superlative I could think of. I knew the committee, including Esme, would read my letter first. I wanted my name, my reputation, my 30 years of credibility to be inextricably linked to his submission. When the bomb went off, I wanted there to be no doubt about who had lit the fuse. I was not an innocent bystander. I was a willing and indeed essential part of the mechanism. I was implicating myself in his fraud in order to make its revelation all the more spectacular. The day he officially submitted his packet, he came to my office with a bottle of expensive scotch. He was giddy, euphoric. "We did it, Amelia," he said, pouring 2 generous glasses. "I couldn't have done it without you." I raised my glass, the amber liquid catching the light. "To the Chandler Award," I said, my voice perfectly even. "May you get everything you deserve, Alistair." He beamed, completely oblivious to the double meaning. "I'll drink to that," he said, and downed his scotch in one go. I just took a small, slow sip, the fiery liquid doing nothing to warm the ice in my veins. The game was afoot. All I had to do now was wait for the checkmate. And so we returned to that moment in the deep, velvet quiet of my office at 2 a.m. Weeks had passed since Cain's submission. The Chandler Committee was in its deliberation phase. The silence from their end was normal, expected. But for me, it was the held breath before the plunge. My final move was the email to Esme. The short, cryptic note, the attached file. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the one that would ensure the picture was clear, that there was no room for misinterpretation, no possibility of her thinking this was some bizarre coincidence. My note wasn't an accusation. It was a quiet, professional courtesy. "I believe you'll find this familiar." It was an invitation for her to connect the dots herself. It gave her all the agency. She would be the one to discover the theft on her own terms. My role was simply to place the evidence in her hands. I hit send. And the world did not change. But I knew it had. A tectonic plate had shifted deep beneath the surface of our small academic world. The tsunami was coming. The first tremor arrived 2 days later, in the form of a phone call from David Chen, a professor in the history department and a fellow member of the tenure committee. He was also, as I knew, serving on the Chandler Committee this year. His voice on the phone was tight, stressed. "Amelia," he said, without any preamble, "we have a problem, a big one." I feigned ignorance, my heart giving a single, hard thump against my ribs. "David, what is it? You sound terrible." "It's about your boy," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if the walls of his own office might be listening. "Cain. There's an issue with his Chandler submission." I let a beat of silence hang in the air, a carefully calibrated pause of confusion. "An issue? What kind of issue?" I went over it myself. "His research is impeccable." "I don't know what to tell you, Amelia," David said, and I could hear the rustle of papers on his end. "Reed, the chair, the woman from Lisbon, she called an emergency meeting this morning. It was a closed session, just the committee members. She presented something, a comparison, his paper next to some of her own work from years ago." "Amelia, it's bad. It's not just similar. It's—" I clutched the phone, my knuckles white. I manufactured a gasp. "What? That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Alistair would never—" "I hope you're right," David cut in, his voice grim. "But Reed is preparing a formal report for the provost. The award deliberation is suspended. An academic integrity investigation is being launched. I thought you should know. As his mentor, you're going to be pulled into this. Thank you, David, I said, my voice a carefully constructed whisper of shock and dismay. I don't know what to say. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself a small, grim smile in the privacy of my empty office. The tsunami was making its way to shore. Kane must have sensed the shift in the atmospheric pressure. The cheerful, confident emails he sent to his professional circle were suddenly met with terse, non-committal replies, or worse, silence. The back-channel gossip about the Chandler Award, which should have been buzzing with his name, had gone dead. He knew something was wrong. He appeared at my office door the next afternoon. The easy, brilliant smile was gone. In its place was a tight, strained mask of anxiety. His eyes, usually so full of confident charm, were darting around as if looking for an unseen threat. "Amelia," he said, his voice a little too high-pitched, "have you heard anything from the committee? It's been completely silent. It's strange." I looked up from my work, my face a carefully composed portrait of serene, scholarly calm. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Alistair," I said, my tone gentle, reassuring. "Committees are a black box, you know that. They move at their own glacial pace. No news is simply no news. Don't torture yourself." He wasn't convinced. He paced the small space in front of my desk, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up. "No, this is different," he insisted. I saw David Chen in the hallway, and he practically ran in the other direction. "People are avoiding my gaze. Something's happened. Do they think my work is flawed?" I held his gaze, my expression unwavering. Inside, my mind was a whirlwind of cold, triumphant calculation. He was beginning to panic. He was realizing the ice beneath his feet was not as thick as he had believed. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said soothingly. "You're just feeling the pressure of being a top contender. It's completely normal. Your work is unassailable, remember that." He stopped pacing and looked at me, a desperate, searching look in his eyes. He was looking for his anchor, his champion, the person who had always told him he was a genius. He was looking to me to restore his sense of reality. And I gave him nothing. My calm, my unwavering support, which had once been his shield, was now becoming a source of his terror. If I, his biggest supporter, was this calm, and yet the world around him was starting to fracture, what could that possibly mean? He was trapped in a nightmare, where his only ally seemed oblivious to the encroaching monsters. He left my office more unsettled than when he had arrived. The panic was taking root. The silent takeover was well underway. The official notification arrived not as a tsunami, but as a cold, sterile email from the provost's office. It was addressed to Dr. Alistair Kane, and I was, as his department head and official mentor, copied on the message. The language was brutally efficient, stripped of all academic pleasantries. It informed him that his tenure case was being immediately frozen. His teaching duties were suspended, effective immediately, pending the outcome of a formal hearing before the university's Academic Integrity Panel. The Chandler Award was mentioned in a single brutal line. "All materials related to your nomination have been sealed as evidence." This was it. The institutional machinery had been activated. The university's trust, the only real currency we have in this profession, had been withdrawn from his account. It wasn't my accusation. It was a formal, institutional process, triggered by irrefutable evidence presented by an unimpeachable external authority. My hands were, to any outside observer, completely clean. Kane's reaction was exactly what I had predicted. He didn't crumble, he lashed out. He was a cornered narcissist, and his only move was to attack. That afternoon, the entire faculty of the Humanities Division received a long, rambling email from his personal account. It was a tirade, a manifesto of the unjustly accused. He claimed he was the victim of a vicious, coordinated campaign of professional sabotage, and he named me as the ringleader. He wrote that I was a bitter, aging academic, jealous of his rapid rise. He accused me of being threatened by his groundbreaking work and of trying to steal his ideas for myself. He painted a picture of me as a manipulative, Machiavellian figure who had pretended to be his mentor only to orchestrate his downfall. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was describing my actions perfectly, but his interpretation of my motive was so fundamentally wrong, so pathetically self-aggrandizing, that it rendered the entire accusation impotent. He thought this was about him. He couldn't conceive of a world where he was merely a symptom of a larger disease I was trying to cure. The email was a fatal miscalculation. Instead of garnering sympathy, it horrified our colleagues. It was unprofessional, hysterical, and deeply revealing of his character. It was the desperate act of a guilty man. My phone began to ring. Colleagues called, not to question my role, but to express their disgust at his behavior and to offer their support to me. He had intended to isolate me, to paint me as the villain. Instead, he had isolated himself completely. He had set fire to his last remaining bridge. The final confrontation happened later that day. He didn't knock. He stormed into my office, his face pale and blotchy with rage. The charming, brilliant Dr. Kane was gone. In his place was a feral, desperate creature. "You," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this. That email to the faculty, you forced my hand." I didn't rise from my chair. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at him, my hands resting calmly on my desk. I let the silence stretch, letting his rage echo in the small space. Then, I asked a single, quiet question. "Did you really think no one would ever read Dr. Reed's work, Alistair? Or did you just hope they wouldn't?" It was the one thing he was not prepared for. He was prepared for denials, for arguments, for a fight. He was not prepared for the calm, simple, devastating truth. My question wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis. It bypassed his anger and went straight to the heart of his pathetic, arrogant calculation. His face crumpled, the rage dissolved, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. He saw in my eyes that I knew everything. Not just that he had cheated, but how he had cheated and why. He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. Then he turned and stumbled out of my office, leaving the door wide open behind him. It was over. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. The final act of the drama played out not in a confrontation, but in a quiet, formal meeting. The dean summoned me to his office a week later. He looked a decade older, the skin around his eyes gray with exhaustion. The scandal had been a nightmare for the university's public relations, a mess he had been forced to clean up. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Amelia," he began, gesturing for me to sit. "The panel has concluded its investigation. The evidence provided by Dr. Reed was overwhelming. It was a line-by-line, irrefutable match." He sighed, rubbing his temples. Kane's defense was incoherent. He continued to insist on a conspiracy, but he couldn't explain the verbatim overlap. It was a complete disaster. I said nothing. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and listened. I was not there as a participant, but as an observer. The system I had put my faith in, the system Kane had tried to corrupt, was now purging the infection. "We gave him a choice," the dean continued, his voice low. He could resign his position, effective immediately, and walk away. The university would agree not to publicize the findings of the integrity panel. Or he could refuse, face a public tribunal, and be formally stripped of not only his post, but his doctorate, which the panel concluded was obtained on the basis of the same fraudulent research. "And what did he choose?" I asked, my voice even. "He chose to resign," the dean said. "The letter is on my desk. His lawyer is handling the details. He'll be gone by the end of the day. His name is already being removed from the faculty website." He looked at me, a long, searching look. There was a question in his eyes, a question he didn't dare ask aloud. He knew my role in this. He couldn't prove it. But he knew. He knew that I had not been a passive victim. But he also knew that I had, in my own way, saved the integrity of his department. "His senior research seminar is now without an instructor," he said, changing the subject. "I need someone to take it over. Someone with impeccable standing. I was hoping you would be willing, Amelia." I nodded slowly. "Of course, Dean," I said. "I would be happy to." That afternoon, I received a short, private email from an address I recognized as Esme's. There was no subject line. The message was just 3 sentences. Amelia, thank you. The garden is a little cleaner today. Let's not wait so long to talk next time. I typed back a simple reply. It was long overdue, Esme. Talk soon. A few days later, I walked into the seminar room that was supposed to have been Kane's. The students were all there, whispering amongst themselves, the air thick with rumor and uncertainty. I walked to the front of the room and placed my notes on the lectern. As my eyes scanned the faces of the young scholars looking up at me, I saw her, Maria. She was sitting in the front row. She was not slumped or downcast. She was sitting up straight, her eyes bright, a notebook open in front of her. She had returned from her research trip to Spain, and she looked different. She looked confident. She gave me a small, tentative smile. I smiled back, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, it was a genuine, unforced smile. It reached my eyes. The king was dead. The throne was empty. But here, in this room, was the beginning of a new reality. A reality built not on charm and theft, but on quiet, honest, painstaking work. It was never about the destruction. It was always about this moment of quiet, hopeful creation. The vindication was not in Kane's fall, but in Maria's rise. Months have passed. The dust has settled. Kane's name is now a cautionary tale whispered in the faculty lounge, a ghost story used to frighten first-year graduate students. He vanished from the academic world as quickly as he had appeared. The Chandler Award was not given out that year. The committee, in a quiet statement, announced that none of the submissions had met the required standard of excellence and originality. An empty space was left where a name should have been, a silent monument to the importance of integrity. I am in my office. The afternoon sun streams through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It's a peaceful, quiet space again. My sanctuary has been reclaimed. Spread across my desk are the first draft pages of Maria's dissertation. It's not just good, it's brilliant, it's groundbreaking, and every single word of it is hers. She found something in that Spanish archive, a connection no one had ever made. She followed her instincts, and they led her to a genuine discovery. Her work is a testament to everything I believe this profession should be. It is slow, it is honest, and it is true. I look at her work and I think about the long, dark path I walked to get to this moment. I think about the lies, the manipulation, the cold, calculated plan, and I feel no regret. Because it was never about revenge. I know I keep saying that, and maybe you don't believe me. Maybe you see a woman who was betrayed and who exacted a terrible and precise vengeance, and perhaps that is part of the truth. But it is not the whole truth. It was about stewardship, academia, our work, our entire world of ideas is a garden, and a garden requires tending. It requires you to patiently nurture the real flowers, to give them the light and the space they need to grow. But it also requires you, sometimes, to pull the weeds, the beautiful, fast-growing toxic weeds that threaten to choke everything else out. You don't pull them because you hate them. You pull them because you love the garden. And now, I want to talk to you. The person watching this, the person who has made it this far. In your life, in your career, in your world, you will encounter the Kanes. They are everywhere. They are the ones who take shortcuts, who steal credit, who build their success on the foundations of other people's labor. They are often charming. They are often successful. And seeing them rise while you do the hard, honest work can be maddening. It can make you feel invisible. It can make you question everything. Do not let it. Building something real, whether it's a career, a piece of art, a company, or a family, is slow work. It is quiet work. It is often thankless work. A foundation made of lies, of theft, of deceit, may look strong for a while, but it is hollow. It cannot bear weight. It will eventually collapse under the pressure of its own emptiness. Your foundation, the one you build with integrity, with honesty, with your own 2 hands, is made of stone. It is solid. It will last. So if you are feeling overlooked, if you are feeling erased, if you are watching a Kane in your own life get the promotion, the award, the recognition you deserve, do not despair. Focus on your work. Keep building your stone foundation. And never, ever underestimate the power of quiet competence. In the end, it is the only power that truly endures. Thank you for listening to my story. It means more than you know. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to deal with a Dr. Kane in your own life. Hearing your stories helps remind me that these quiet battles for integrity are fought by so many of us, and that we are not alone. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in the ultimate triumph of quiet, honest work, please do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear this message today, and hit that subscribe button for more stories about turning the tables and reclaiming what's yours.